Yeah, I have not had a look at this.
Okay, given that Francisco's not here, maybe we just handle this one offline. Trying to read through.
I'm leading through as well. It seems like switching the bool field. But there are also 39 changes. Yeah, I'm gonna take a look at this. In more detail.
I'm trying to remember the background. Like, I know what the feature does. I'm trying to remember the background, why it wasn't made default true in the first place.
I think we didn't want to break our users. We didn't want to change existing behavior, but we want to offer this as a way for people to test it.
I just don't remember what we thought we might break. So with this, right now, the behavior right is we install the IP tables on pod startup, not on CNI restart, right? Or update.
Yeah, so on CNI boot, we don't sort of reconcile and look for the absence of the IP tables rules. Does this is Jackie? Correct me if I'm wrong. Is this solving the same thing that own CNI does? Are they the same class of problem?
I don't think so. I need to read this issue more carefully, but I can add that to my list of things and review this one. But I don't think so. I don't think that covers the same realm, but I think it's like a slightly different scenario. But I can take a look.
Okay, that would help. Yeah. But yeah, it seems like the ask here is to review with some priority to try to get this in before branch cut. I think is or before the next release for sure.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. It might be good to collect some feedback on if some user have used this flag to true. I assume there are user already tested this.
We should certainly ask around, but I do think we should have a strong opinion about this. There's John, you might remember. And welcome to the party. Happy New Year. We were trying to remember why we didn't enable reconcile IP on startup by default.
It's just a matter of stability and testing and that sort of thing.
So it's just a maturity thing, not necessarily an expectation that it would break something.
Well, the implementation is not really reliable. It's maybe in a way that it's reliable enough. I mean, it relies on things that are not like safe to rely on, if that makes sense. Like we're parsing like the output of IP tables, which is something that is known to be broken to do, but it may be broken in a way that doesn't actually impact us. That makes sense. And we actually, as far as I know, I haven't found bugs in that, but it wasn't like a slam dunk. Like this seems like obviously correct, and we're just being cautious.
Okay, so this is a tension between that and the obvious failure mode of node restarts or daemon set restarts in particular, leaving users high and dry, right?
Yeah, I think also at the time when it was first introduced, I'm not sure that we fully were aware of the problems with the restart, and it wasn't as pressing. It was more about like, oh, we changed the IP tables rules between versions, which we had done at the time. So I think given now that we haven't really seen any issues with it, and I think people have turned it on even though it wasn't on by default, and there's more issues popping up, it does probably make sense to move forward with it.
Okay. So it's the lesser of two evils by some distance then at this point. Okay. Should we approve now, or do people want a little bit of time to think about it? What should I put in the notes?
I want to take a look at it just to make sure it's not, or just to understand the relationship with the problem that own CNI solves,
Yeah,
and how
same.
they might interact. But if you don't hear from me like into the week, feel free to move forward.
This is the peak EWMA thing. Who wants to talk about this?
I have some context around this. So basically, there is a new load balancing algorithm added to Envoy, and the ask is to compile it into Istio proxy. Not expose it as a feature yet, but compile it into the proxy. There seems to be, I'm not super familiar with the implementation details of this particular load balancing algorithm, but does seem very on the surface seems reasonable and an improvement on some other load balancing strategies. The author mentions somewhere, I think in the agenda, that Linkerd already has this by default, and that it's in use in HA proxy as well as even Ingress and Nginx. So from just a landscape perspective, I'm inclined to include it in. It still requires users to deploy an Envoy filter to use today, so the risk is fairly low in my opinion. And longer term, we can think about adding it into the like expose it as a feature in some cases.
Keith, can you elaborate on that risk that you're talking about with regard to Envoy filters? I didn't quite catch that.
I'm saying because it still requires an Envoy filter, I don't see it as a high risk. I don't think that this is going to, if there is a bug in the implementation, I think the exposure to our user base is going to be fairly low, just because it requires Envoy filter to configure.
Gotcha. I guess the only that causes just a little bit of pause in that we said that kind of our theme for 2025 was going to be reducing reasons to use Envoy filters. This seems to be creating another, although it's adding new functionality that presumably they could add with more Envoy filters already. So maybe that's a null point.
Well, I think down the road, we would look at an API change, Mitch, to support this in destination rule.
Okay.
So having looked at EWMA and peak EWMA algorithmically, right, regardless of I haven't looked at the implementation here, right? Like in general, they are better load balancing algorithms than certainly than round robin, and almost certainly better than least request. They're variants of least request, effectively. So I have no algorithmic objection to this being part of the roadmap. Like obviously, I think that progressing it through Envoy, getting testing on it, evaluating whether it's doing what it's supposed to be doing, whether the implementation is good quality or not good quality, right? I think that's a separate discussion. But we have plenty of latent Envoy features that are sitting around anyway that we don't use, or if people use them would break us. So I don't have a specific objection to having a latent feature here.
Yeah, I'd say the same. I would say don't read Linkerd blogs and extrapolate that this behaves the same, because around robin, there's probably not many different ways to implement it. Actually, there are, but they probably behave the same. But Peak EWMA, they all use the same name. They're not necessarily using the same implementation, and not just like in terms of the details, but in terms of the behavior. So I have no idea. Envoy 1 may be amazing and the best of all of them, but it could also be much different. So we should do our own validation before we go and say this is amazing and we want to turn it on by default. But that's not blocking for merging this at all.
Yeah. So I think if we do want to add, assuming this is fine, the next step would be to do a critical evaluation of how good an implementation it is and whether that becomes part of the Istio feature set. And possibly even if it's really good, becoming the default.
I think that that's reasonable as well. Again, given all the caveats you just mentioned, if algorithmically it's a fairly strict improvement over what exists, I see no reason to not think about graduating it to a default behavior for the mesh or for the gateway or for whatever else.
Right, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the current default is round robin.
No, we switched to least request.
Oh, we switched to least request. When did we switch?
I don't know. Nate Naylor did it, so at least 2 years ago,
3
3
years.
maybe.
At least, yeah. It's been a long time, Louis.
Globally, even not just in zTunnel.
Yes, zTunnel uses random actually, so zTunnel's the worst.
Oh, that's true. Fair enough. Okay.
Okay, well then there's a slightly higher bar for this thing to get over to become the default if we wanted it to be. But it is a variant
Right.
of least request, so.
Which is not the ask here, so I think that we can probably move on with this because
Okay.
there's no objection.
All right, so TNC approved for inclusion in build for experimentation. Want to see follow up testing the performance. Keith and Quaff.
Yes. Not sure if Quat or Z-Rain or WBP code are here, but I wanted to bring the discussion to this meeting because I saw a PR and definitely want to discuss it. So there's an open PR. If you'll click that Istio proxy PR, Louis. What's happened is essentially some of the Envoy community have moved all of Istio's filters into a Envoy contrib subdirectory. So all of Istio's filters from workload discovery to AOPN, JWT, actually moved away from JWT. Like all the filters, you basically moved it. They moved it to Istio contrib, or sorry, Envoy contrib / Istio. And now what they're proposing is to sort of make Envoy the source of truth for those filters. There is not, I haven't seen at least a design doc on sort of the implications of this and how, what does the Istio proxy repo stay around for? Right now, there's with this PR that we're looking at here, there's E2Es that are still left in the repo, as well as the Bazel build configuration for what filters get added into the Istio build. So, for example, we wouldn't take all of contrib. We would still select the filters that we want to include in our proxy builds here in this repo. But other than that, like Istio proxy really just becomes a place for E2Es and Bazel configuration versus actual filter code. The reason for this is to sort of reduce the drift between Envoy and Istio when it comes to, and Istio proxy when it comes to tool chains. Things like Bazel migrations and the move to Bazel 7, the move to the hermetic LLVM tool chain also sort of broke Istio proxy. Mikhail's got a PR to try to fix some of that. But the idea is that if we have all the code living in Envoy, then it becomes a bit easier to build. There's not sort of a duplicate. There's no compilation, like custom compilation and linking happening in this repo. So that's sort of the positioning. I wanted to bring it to this group to see who's got strong opinions. This is not an area that we have a ton of active maintainers. I think myself and Z-Rain have been doing most of the legwork for the past year or so. Quat is around every now and again, but I think is working on different projects by and large. So from my perspective, I think this could reduce some of the drift, but I've always liked the ability to keep a degree of control for the Istio project for how these filters evolve and such. One thing I forgot to add in that control topic actually is that they did set myself and Mikhail to be maintainers of that Istio contrib subdirectory in Envoy proxies. So we do have approval rights there, but it definitely something we're thinking about as far as the ability to create our own fork and just do it because we need it for Istio versus other things. So I'll stop talking at this point and love to get thoughts from folks on this move.
Does it help with all the build stuff, Keith? Because we're still building it in our repo, so we still have our build config, right? Like all these commits, if you look here, they're all about customizing the build config now.
Yeah. So part of the reason for this is because this is built on top of Mikhail's PR. So the commits that you're looking at in the screenshot are coming from Mikhail's PR to fix drift from the move to the upstream Envoy, from upstream Envoy's move to a hermetic tool chain. So in theory,
they'll just move again though, and then we'll have to change again, right?
Not if we just mirror the Envoy config. So I think if I understand it correctly, part of the reason for the drift is because we had one set of config for building the C++ in our local repo, and Envoy had another set of Bazel config for building its stuff. And we actually ended up, we copy a file from Envoy, a Bazel config file that's Envoy's Bazel config. And I think the idea is that this would move that drift. I think at least.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure why we have to move the code to remove the drift. Those seem unrelated. But anyhow, I think it's a good change. But yeah, overall, like I think definitely the prerequisite needs to be that the current Istio maintainers of the code remain Istio maintainers. We can't just decide new people are suddenly the maintainers of Istio code because they moved it to a different repo. I do think we need to have a clear understanding of how this is going to work for private releases, because we've often made changes like this and then we scramble like crazy when there's a CV to come out. I don't like the hand waving on the PR that's like, oh, nothing will change. It doesn't seem to be true based on people that are actually doing the builds in the PSWG. So I would like some confirmation there. Overall, I don't really think this organization makes sense. Like, we've now moved the code away from the tests. So you now write the code in one repo. It later gets imported into this repo. We then have to rebuild it, retest it, and then we package it up, and then we go into Istio repo and where we retest it again. And so you're like 3 repos removed from being able to test the code you wrote. So it does feel pretty awkward to have this intermediate stage. Like at the origin of the idea of moving to Envoy, the idea was, my understanding, to use Envoy's binaries directly, which for what it's worth, I never liked that goal because it's kind of moving in a direction where we're not, we're shipping code instead of shipping a product, which is not something we've done as a project. I know other CNCF projects have taken that direction, but it's not something that's good for our users. Because it removes our control and our ability to say, like, build our own Envoy when there's a CV, right? Or apply a patch if we need to, those sorts of things. So overall, I'm a bit confused because it doesn't seem to actually meet that goal. Not that I agree with the goal to begin with, but.
Daniel, do you want to weigh in from PSWG perspective?
Yeah, from the PSWG perspective, we don't build Envoy in private anymore. We've moved, and I put a comment in this PR, but we moved to doing patches in the Istio proxy Bazel config. So we don't really have a concern with the difficulty of the private builds of Envoy, if that makes sense. We just do the Istio proxy builds, and any code we need to change from Envoy, we do through patches that are defined in Bazel. And it makes it easier from an accounting perspective because we don't have a point to a commit that's from a private repo that nobody can look at. It's all out in the open.
Mikhail, I see you're here in the meeting. Do you want to weigh in because you've been closer to the Bazel config than I have? Anything you want to add here?
I wanted to mention that Quad mentioned left a comment there. From his point of view, this is beneficial because apparently there is, like, in Envoy there is no stable internal API, right? So if you change some interfaces there in the upstream Envoy and then you build a Istio proxy with custom plugins that depends on those interfaces, you have to like go and update them. And moving the plugins, Istio plugins to the upstream Envoy kind of deals with that part of the issue. Just mentioning it here because I think he only left a comment like today or yesterday.
Apologies, folks. As I mentioned in the chat, I need to drop. So can someone take over presenting in GetReady?
I can take over. I probably won't take good notes as you, but yeah, thanks.
For what it's worth, I looked over the last few years of commits in the proxy repo, and it looks like last year there was 7 times that we had breakages from upstream, and the year before that there was 3 times. And often these are like, changing something to be a pointer and not a pointer or something like that. So they're not necessarily like someone's spending weeks of work to fix these up.
I think it's difficult to, get to closure on this without the folks proposing the PR here. So it might be good to continue this discussion in the PR. I will say that, John, you brought up a good point about control of the repo and control of the plugins, the filters. Thank you. When it comes to the current state of things right now, it's Quat, WBP Code, myself, and Mikhail who are maintainers there, and that if it's effectively Istio code living somewhere else, and I don't know how I feel about if Envoy requires a senior maintainer to approve every PR that we submit there. Like, I think that's sort of my biggest concern about this is the process. Not a big surprise coming from me. Like, if we need to fork something or do something that Envoy doesn't think is good, what do we need to wait for senior maintainers to look at our stuff? And that's a concern for me.
Is that how it works? Like, is it, let's say you're an owner there, like you said, can I submit something and you approve it and just the 2 of us deal with it and it gets merged? Assuming it only touches the Istio code.
I think I'd have to double check, but I think every Envoy PR also requires a senior maintainer to approve. I might be wrong about that, but that's been the case for all of my PRs.
So basically, we will lose our maintainers to be able to approve the PRs when it was in the Istio org, right? After move to Envoy, somebody else who is a senior maintenance would be dependent on them, if that's the case.
I believe that's so. I'm looking at the code owners file now, and I don't see the senior maintainers group anywhere, but I do know that, like, looking at every PR on Envoy, that I can find for approval a senior maintainer has approved.
Yeah, so that's certainly a big risk. So, Keith, do you want to double check the process? Because we don't have any Envoy senior maintainer in the Istio community, so we'd be relying on one senior maintainer for approval, which could slow us down.
Yep. I will double check that process and see what the implications are there. All right, thanks, folks.
Yeah, thanks. So, folks, should we park this topic and move to the next one once Keith has more understanding about the approval process? Daniel, go ahead.
Sorry, wrong button. Ignore me.
Okay. Okay, no worries. All right, folks, let's put attention on to Stephen, Z-tunnel Istio dry run auth. Do we have Stephen? Okay, maybe not
doesn't
from
look like it.
holiday. Oh, yeah, maybe.
I've been involved. I can maybe speak to it. So there's a Z-tunnel PR. It looks okay, but testing it was tricky to like know that it worked end to end. So I wrote an Istio PR for it, and it worked pretty good. While thinking about that PR and the implications of it, it seems like this is something we could just gate behind a feature flag temporarily. The big concern is when you add a new field in WDS, Z-tunnel will accept it and just ignore the new field. So an old Z-tunnel, if it gets a dry run off policy sent to it, would suddenly start enforcing it. And that's definitely something we don't want. So it needs to be off for upgrades, potentially. But then users interested in the feature could enable it once they have a Z-tunnel that supports this. And I think that seems fairly reasonable. Does anyone have like thoughts or strong pushback against that?
Is the concern only during the upgrade the Z-tunnel is not current with the control plane, that they would be missing a feature?
So previously, Istio, if it saw a dry run policy, it would just ignore it and not send it to Z-tunnel at all because Z-tunnel didn't have support for it. In this implementation, we will send it to Z-tunnel with a new field. But if the old Z-tunnel doesn't support that field, it'll just accept the policy without knowing it and enforce it as a real policy. That's what we want to avoid with the feature flag.
Okay, well, I'm trying to understand what other scenario people would be on the old Z-tunnel. Would that be only explored in the upgrade scenario?
That's the primary reason I could see them encountering an issue.
Okay.
I mean, we do not recommend that folks just run mismatched long-term at all, so.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, so this is a pretty small window, I guess, and they would happen to run this dry run command when the Z-tunnel version and control plane version doesn't match, right?
Yeah.
And that effectively is resolved by using our revision-based upgrades, yes?
Mm,
Because the Z-tunnel is always talking to its own version of the control plane.
yeah, I think that's correct.
That seems acceptable to me. We've said for years that in-place upgrades have inherent unsafety that we can't improve on without.
And to be fair, you would have to do it to yourself. Like it's going to be off by default. So you would have to go, yep, I want this unsafe upgrade despite this thing that's telling me in the in the thing not to do it. I'm going to turn this on, and now I'm having a bad time. I think it's fairly reasonable as an upgrade path, but it does opt people who like really want this feature to do their upgrade and then get into it, which I think is handy, as opposed to shipping a dormant feature in zTunnel with literally zero way to access it.
Yeah.
All right. So does Stephen have any concern or the fact that he brought this up? Do you know, Ian?
I think his concern is really just the timelines around things. In chatting with him, he had initially thought this was unfeasible, but I think I've convinced him otherwise. So.
All right. Seems the minimum risk and also a small window. This could be explored and it's not enabled by default. So does anyone have any objections?
I dropped a link to a very similar discussion that happened in the NetPol working group into the chat around introducing this in the like cluster network policy API. Basically the same thing, introducing a dry run mode to a policy that people are already using and what the expected behavior and actual behavior would be in that case. I think this is a much more tractable problem within a single project where we actually control the behavior. And the solution that you're proposing sounds like it works to me. It's probably worth reading through the comments on there to understand like what are possible failure scenarios and how other projects have approached this.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. That's a good reference. All right, I'm not hearing any objections. So I'm going to record that. And should we move on to the next topic about which I'm not sure if anybody can represent Stephen? Well, he's not here.
I looked at it. The PR, I think, already merged, and Steven's got some questions about naming and types. So there's this file flush API and proxy config, and I think he was looking for words, some feedback on the types and the naming. So duration versus the unsigned int, and then having the denominate the unit of the size in there, so making it kilobytes. I think this is mainly on the agenda just to get some eyes because it's an already merged PR.
Thanks for that context. All right, I'm not hearing anybody have any hands on this. I think we're going to move on to Liam about the first class support for Lua filters. I think this has been ongoing for a while. So Liam, go ahead.
Yeah, so I just wanted to get to the stage where like I understand exactly what feedback is required to get to an implementation. So I believe, and Keith, please correct me if I'm wrong, basically that TOC asked for having kind of a single CRD, which can then have specific fields for WASM and Lua, and potentially cell and whatever stuff needs to be added in the future, or we want to add in the future, right? Is that correct? There has been pushback from or a comment from Daniel Grimm basically saying why. I can't push back on him saying I don't know why. I know why, because like I wasn't in the TOC meeting, so I don't know why. But I just wanted to first like reiterate that's the approach that we want to take with this. As kind of like the first thing.
Great question. So and I've got like 2 minutes. Okay, so what I'll say is going back to that TOC meeting discussion. The idea is that we don't want an unbounded number, well, relatively unbounded number of APIs for doing the same thing that are all shaped the same way. I think generally, if Kubernetes had a better solution for polymorphism, we would try to use that. But in lieu of that, sort of having a single field, a single resource with one of semantics seems to make a lot of sense. Daniel was and some other folks from Red Hat were also in that TOC meeting, and their point was, I think generally on the RBAC side, is that you can sort of say, how do you as an admin say you can have these sorts of you can create these sorts of extensions, but not these sorts of extensions. You can do Lua, but not WASM or not dynamic modules or vice versa. My answer to that would generally be cell and validating that mission policy. And I think there are ways to be able to handle that sort of concern. The other thing that was brought up was I'd originally felt like, oh, maybe we could move away from WASM plugin, but there are a lot of people who still like WASM plugin. And so I'm happy to back off of that. I think that maybe we still keep WASM plugin at alpha as it stands today, maybe in perpetuity, who knows? But I think from a maintainer perspective, thinking about the growth of the project and the number and the growth of Envoy as well, and the different extensibility pieces, having one resource is just more feasible for us as a downstream consumer of Envoy versus having to take the burden of a resource per extension method.
Okay, so the trade-off is primarily around RBAC stuff versus not wanting to have create a bunch of boilerplate for both users and for us in the API repo, and then for the massively increasing the amount of Envoy in-memory configuration. Well, not massively, but increasing the amount of in-memory stuff we need to keep track of for each of these different resources, and then also presumably API server load and a bunch of other things, right?
For me, it's less the actual resource requirements and more of the project maintainability and creating consistent user experience across them.
Docs.
Yeah, docs, exactly. When to use which one, bracket. Yeah, I think that's just a lot for us to take on with the number of people who are active in the community, and so one resource just feels more maintainable.
For better or for worse, like if we were to not do this in one resource, and then the next time we have an extensibility type that we'd like to add, we will go back and redebate every single field that we debated this time. That's just kind of how we are as a community. It's good that we have a high bar for API reviews, but having this shared type for extensibility will save us, I think, a lot of headache as we try to add new extensibility mechanisms in the future.
Okay. The second question I have was around Lynn's question of examples. How I can go through and add a bunch more examples to this to kind of get sign off, but it is essentially like not adding any new functionality, right? Like it is essentially the same match that exists currently in the WASM plugin API. Do we want to investigate or reinvestigate exactly how we do the matching? Is there a desire for that? Or generally, I avoided this because I didn't want to like boil the ocean to solve a problem. But is that something we want to investigate, or are we fine with just saying we are not adding any net new functionality here? It's exactly the same like matching and selection stuff that exists in currently in the WASM plugin API.
Yeah, by the way, that was not just my comment. I think I probably was the moderator for that call on November 19. And that was the comment I heard and I summarized. Well, we kind of discuss, how do we indicate maybe certain fields it's only applicable for waypoint or not for waypoint. You know, what are the security concerns? Right now we allow cross namespace for waypoint. So how are we going to handle that with moving to extension filter? I just want to clarify, that was a comment I summarized from the call.
Okay.
And I think Mike mentioned about the TOC recording. Honestly, I don't remember if this was discussed in the TOC meeting or in the work group meeting, but I do remember review your proposal multiple times. And the folks from Red Hat team was feeling very strongly. Part of it was because I think they have a lot of people using Lua filter in their environment. So they just want to make sure, you know, the existing Lua filter can continue work, which we all agree they will work for a very long time. That definitely is their concern.
Well, presumably they're doing it via Envoy filter, right? So that
Yes,
kind of stuff is
Envoy
not
filter.
affected. that's
No,
the problem we're
care
trying to
about
get away
WASM,
from, right?
Not Lua.
Oh, they're using WASM. Okay.
Okay, maybe I remember wrong. Yeah, so WASM filter, they use it extensively, so they were very worried about this taking over.
Okay. Interesting. Okay, so from this side, you want me to go back and like have a discussion around how this impacts waypoints versus sidecars and that type of stuff, despite it being the same as existing WASM plugin API.
Yeah, I'm not really sure why we need that if we know it's the same already as existing WASM.
Yeah, that was kind of like my point of confusion was
So
if I was
maybe-
proposing a change, sure, but
I think maybe it would just be good to document what are the behavior. Like, do we actually allow, do we allow WASM plugin impact cross namespace today? Which I'm not sure if we do.
Yes.
Okay, so then that means this extension filter naturally would also allow people to configure cross namespace, right? And then the other question we had was the mode is client only, right? Because with waypoint, you actually the waypoint is only work on the target, right? So I'm actually trying to understand. So with waypoint, what would be the reasonable mode for? You wouldn't be able to do client? Is that true? Trying to think loud here. I think it would be good to understand what are the limitations.
sure. Do we know if if waypoints are different to gateways in this sense? I don't know who that was a question for, but my understanding is generally like waypoints and gateways are kind of similarly constructed. But okay, I can go.
I think
go
they
look
are
for the code and
similar
see.
construction, but there are differences. Like you don't put a waypoint on your source, right? You put your waypoint on your destination. But for gateway, you would be able to do like client-side routing, if I understand correctly.
I believe gateways client and server.
Right, you can do client and the server, and for waypoint, I think it's only on the server side. I could be wrong. So I think these
Okay.
caveats, maybe you don't need a lot of examples, just would be good, because I think as you implement this, you would also need to highlight the difference.
Yeah, I would. Yeah. Okay. And then the other thing is more of a bike shedding question, but the name of extension filter was one of the other comments, but I don't know if we need to have that discussion now. Just if anyone has strong opinions, then put them in comments. I just from my side, I went with that because that's the best name I could think of. But if anyone has stronger ideas, I'm happy to go with whatever. I'm not really opinionated on this.
Yeah, I don't see anybody propose a better name, honestly. So
Even the thread where they said that name is not good, I think they admitted they also don't have a better one.
Yeah. So okay, then I guess we're going with extension filter. That was my thought process there.
This is as good as we can get so far.
Okay. All right. I will go off and do the waypoint stuff and then ping a couple of people. I don't know who wants to be pinged about that, but if you do, just kind of update the notes and I'll ping you directly with the changes.
All right. Thank you so much, Liam.
Thanks.
Do we have the next person here to present this topic?
Yes, I'm on call.
Hi, Dixia.
Hi. So I'm the owner of this feature in Kubernetes, pod level resources, and it's already in beta. So what it essentially does is it allows the user to specify the requests and limits at the pod level along or without the container level values. So I'm looking for a POC who can help me review this from Istio's perspective, because we plan to do the GA probably in 137 and not the next release. So yeah, that's my request. Who could help me here review this from Istio's perspective?
Is the thought here that this will impact sidecar injection because of the resource modifications that happen there?
Right. So either we want to, from that perspective, either we want to see that do we need any changes in the logic, or just having all the details in the documentation saying that your sidecar containers would be impacted by whatever you're setting at the pod level, or do the sidecar containers also, the requests and the limits there also need to have information about pod level resources being set by the user? So yeah, need to review it from that perspective.
From an API perspective, what's the impact of setting both a pod level resource request as well as a container level resource request?
So if the container level resource request, the aggregates of all the containers is greater than the pod will be rejected. It's only from the request perspective. If the limits are greater, it should be fine. But yeah, if there are a couple of cases that would be rejected if there are a couple of validation rules. One being that if the aggregated container request is greater than the pod level request, that pod will be rejected. The same is not the case with pod level limits. The aggregates of limits can be smaller than the pod level limits to allow the resource sharing amongst containers. So yeah, there are a couple of nuances, and yeah.
Yeah, I'm hoping this is transparent to Istio. I would recommend you, I can maybe send you some pointer to look at our sidecar injection template to see how we configure resources for sidecar today. But I'm really hoping this cap is transparent for our project. And I don't see reasons why it would not, because you would probably expect people's containers continue to work with this cap if they're not leveraging this new feature.
If they're not leveraging the new feature, yeah, I think we'll be fine. The problem will be when a user creates a pod, sets a resource request or limit on the pod level, our injector will then create a limit on the container level, and now we have a conflict.
Right. So there could be two things here. One, like I said, have it in the documentation that the user needs to be aware of the sidecar containers being injected, and hence they need to set the pod level requests and limits in such a way such that that pod isn't rejected. Or the second thing could be is we modify the Istio, the sidecar containers logic such that it adds the padding to the pod level values. When I say padding, I mean the requests and limits that the sidecars require. Maybe that can be added to the pod level values such that there are no issues with that pod.
Yeah, I mean, that would require a significant logic change, because right now we're just patching
Right.
the pod, whereas this would require actually reading and mutating, but that might be what we need to do.
I think, Mitch, I think it's fine. We look at the full pod, and then we make our patch based on that, and we can do
Okay.
anything.
Okay.
Yeah. So as long as there's a function of we get a pod in and we get a pod out that we can compute, then we should be fine. I do think there will be problems for sure when you have multiple webhooks and ordering and multiple different things injecting sidecars, and you need all of them to support it. Like we had a big issue with native sidecars, for example, where there was a new field in the init container. Actually, it wasn't a new field, but it was a newly valid field or something. Maybe it was a new field. I don't know, something like that. And basically any webhook, it wasn't just Istio, they would marshal it into the pod object, which would silently drop the new field, and then marshal it back out, and then it would be rejected. And so I think you'll see something similar here, where like a user will set a pod resource. It's fully valid. I'm not even talking about Istio here, just anything. And someone will have a webhook, like Datadog webhook or something, that's injecting some annotation or something simple that has nothing to do with resources. It's going to silently drop the resource field because it doesn't know about it. And then it's going to send a patch back to the API server saying remove the resource field. And now suddenly the user has no resources. So our problem is much harder because we're going to have to modify the resources field probably. But I think you'll have issues even with very simple pod webhooks as well.
Right. So that's going to be an issue, but we were thinking that we would just document it saying that this is a change that would be needed in the webhooks if the expectation is to use pod level resources. So do you think we should do the same in Istio as well?
I think for sure there would be like a minimum version of Istio, and same with the other webhooks. Like all they have to do is update their version. Generally, would be the fix I would imagine there. We'll have to go add to support though, so I don't, we'll have to have an owner to go do that.
Sorry, I had a network issue. Does this mean we have to make changes in Istio?
Yes.
Oh God. Okay. But then we would have to worry about backwards compatible too, right?
No, it's just a change to if they're using the new feature, then we have new behavior. If they're not using it, then there's no change.
Yeah. So we can just have an Istio version that's compatible with pod level resources versus the one that's not compatible.
Okay.
Yeah.
But then the user, when they install Istio, would they have to, like, we would have to figure out they have support for this feature and then use the version that has support for this?
No, we don't. It's just when the pod comes in for the webhook, if they have the new field set, we should understand it. That's all.
Okay, so no impact too. So we have the logic built in the webhook to inject.
Yeah, there's nothing like we need to like detect versions or support. No, nothing complex. Just new field. Yeah.
Okay, so what should be my next steps? Should I go ahead and create an issue with the details?
I think that would be good. Yeah.
Okay.
I think there is an issue actually.
Okay. Yeah, if you have an issue, I can put in the meeting minutes.
Yeah, I think there was an issue. Yeah, let me look it up. Yeah, I think there is one already. I just need to link it. So I'll link that one, and then who do I reach out to help find an owner for that one? Would someone just pick it up?
Yeah, right now we don't have an owner yet. I mean, certainly we would love to have people help out or somebody was willing to pick it up.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, I'll try to find, I'll try to reach out to you guys again if there is no owner by end of January. Otherwise, I'll also try to see if I can work on this myself.
All right, thank you. And Mitch also commented he might be able to find somebody too.
Okay.
All right, thank you, Dixita. I think we are at the top of the hour. So Ian, is your thing urgent? Can we wait until next week?
Just PSA. It's out there. If you got questions, ask in like the ambient Slack, and I'll try to respond. And then otherwise, we can talk next week. Thanks.
All right. Thank you so much, Ian. Thanks everybody for joining. Bye now.
Thanks.
Wait, is this now or was it at noon?
It's just ended.
Oh, damn it. I got the time confused. Okay.